Welcome back to the OU Insider YouTube channel. This is the Quick Slants 2023 preview series as we dive into every single matchup on the Oklahoma Sooners schedule this fall. This week, we come to game number 8, a road trip to Lawrence, Kansas, David Booth Memorial Stadium, Cavisto Field, whatever you know it as. Oklahoma takes on the Jayhawks of Kansas under the direction of head coach Lance Leipold, who's going into his 3rd year with the program. And in year 2, Jesse, Leipold made remarkable strides. I'm a big fan of the guy. That's no secret for those that listen to the Under the Visor podcast and have kind of heard some of my comments on him in the past. But to do what he's done in such a short time at a program that was in such dire straits as Kansas was when he inherited that job fresh off the Les Miles scandal, it's really impressive that the Jayhawks are playing the type of football that they're playing right now. And who would have guessed that in the year 2023, Jesse, they would have a first-team All-Big 12 quarterback in Jalen Daniels?
Yeah, no kidding. And if you think back to last year, Kansas was one of the biggest stories in the country over the first half of last season. Not only winning games, but winning games decisively. And so, yeah. And I know. I think if you forget everything that happened, you just look at their record. They finished 6-7. You're thinking, well, what's the hype about? Well, for one, they dealt with injuries. Jalen Daniels, you just mentioned, was a guy that missed some games last year. But 2, I thought one of the most exciting games of the season was the bowl game between Kansas and Arkansas last season. That was one of the most exciting games of the season and went to overtime. And I think Kansas proved then that they're for real, that they're here to be competitive. And I honestly think, you mentioned him, I think the biggest reason why I'm excited and why I'm a little bullish on Kansas next season is Jalen Daniels. And they got talent on both sides of the ball, but Jalen Daniels is real. I think that game in Norman last year could have, maybe it goes a little bit differently if Jalen Daniels is in the game.
Now, it was not Jalen Daniels who was doing the bulk of the damage for Kansas the last time that they hosted Oklahoma. The guy that drew the start in that football game back in 2021 was Jason Bean, who's still on this roster. He's the 2nd string for Kansas at the quarterback position. But I just remember that game, Jesse, as one of the most bizarre that I have watched in my decades of watching and covering Oklahoma football. The Sooners trailed 10-0 at halftime. And keep in mind, this was still an absolutely awful Kansas football team. They trailed 10-0. The luster for some people was kind of starting to wear off, the whole Caleb Williams experiment. In the second half, the Sooners get it rolling. They trail 17-7 going into the 4th quarter, but are able to kick things into gear and run away, ultimately coasting to a 35-23 victory. I think most remember that game for the absurd 4th down play where Caleb Williams stripped the ball out of Kennedy Brooks' hands and fell across the 1st down marker. But as you reflect on that game and just the overall weirdness of what transpired in Lawrence that day, how much more do you worry about something similar happening in 2023, but Oklahoma perhaps not being as able to dig themselves out of the hole against a Kansas football team that is leaps and bounds more talented than they were 2 years ago?
Yeah, whether that's looking at the game in Lawrence 2 years ago, or whether it's looking at last season's game, I have said repeatedly that that OU Kansas game last season was close, and I think if it wasn't for a couple of plays that OU's defense made, I think that game could have been that OU could have been in even more trouble last season. So I can guarantee you this: going into Lawrence, Kansas is not going to be scared of Oklahoma. I think they're going to go into that game thinking they could beat Oklahoma and that they would want to do nothing more than beat Oklahoma in Lawrence as OU's out the door to the SEC. And yeah, we've talked about Jalen Daniels, obviously Jason Bean's back too, but they get Devin Neal at running back. He's coming back. He rushed for over 1,000 yards last season. They get Luke Grimm and Lawrence Arnold at wide receiver. They're both back. Kenny Logan Jr. at defensive back. He had 106 tackles last year as a defensive back. Just insanity. I almost had to double take when I was looking up stats for them a couple of weeks ago. This team, I think this team's going to be good. And I think there should be, should OU be favored? Should OU win? Yes. But I think Kansas could make some noise if they stay healthy. And that is, I don't think going into Lawrence is a gimme for OU by any way, in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, I ask you this question every single week when we do these game previews, Jesse, but and I'll kind of expand it a little bit. I usually ask you who's the key player, but what do you think is just the overall key for Oklahoma to avoid an upset bid from the Jayhawks?
Yeah, again, I think it's all going to be about Oklahoma's defense. I mean, Kansas, I mean, Jason Bean's a good player, but without Jalen Daniels last year, this Kansas team still put up 42 points on Oklahoma in Norman. I think this Kansas team, I think the Kansas offense is going to be, I expect them to be explosive. Parker, they scored 36 points per game last season. They were in the top 25 in scoring offense. I don't see any reason why Kansas is going to slow down. I think this has shootout potential written all over it. And I think it's going to have to start with OU's defense. And I think particularly in the secondary. I mean, Jalen Daniels is a dual threat quarterback. He can run, but he's a good passer too. So I think it's going to put so much pressure on that OU secondary to try to find ways to contain him, not only help in stopping in the run game, but also protecting against this throwing ability. And if they're not careful, this thing could turn into a shootout real quick.
Well, and I think also if you're Oklahoma and you remember this football team and have been to Lawrence before, I think of guys like Woody Washington, for instance, that have spent 5, even 6 years with this program, guys that have made multiple trips to Lawrence in the past. What are you used to when you go up there? An absolutely dead game day environment, right? Empty seats all over the place, entire sections devoid of fans. That's not going to be the case when you show up here in 2023. That environment is going to be rowdy because folks at the University of Kansas, that student section, that fan base as a whole, they have reason to be excited about their football program. And as we saw last year, I mean, they were selling out games by week 4. So you give these people something to be excited about, they're going to show up to watch Kansas football. And playing in a hostile environment like that, it's just natural, right? That's going to be more daunting for a program. And it's kind of an intimate environment there at Booth Memorial Stadium. It doesn't feel like the most cavernous of stadiums, but that bowl can get loud. It's designed to get loud based on the structure and just the way that it's constructed. So Oklahoma's probably going to have to deal with a lot more crowd noise than they're used to in Lawrence. And you do got to worry about what happens if, say, Kansas gets the ball first in that football game, is able to punch you in the mouth early and build some momentum behind that home crowd. So I think for Oklahoma, you're absolutely right, Jesse. There are going to need to be points scored. You're probably going to have to plan for a shootout because this is a Kansas program that has 4 first-team All-Big 12 players, of course, headlined by Jalen Daniels. It's not going to be a walk in the park on either side of the ball for this football team. That said, I think they should have an easier time moving the ball against Kansas's defense than preventing the Kansas offense from marching on down the field. So it's probably a high scoring game. If I had to project, maybe it might not be 52-42 like it was last year, but I think you'll see both teams put up some points. And I do give Oklahoma the edge, Jesse, and I think that's very understandable when you look at the talent discrepancy between these two programs, right? Kansas is much more talented than they have been in recent years. They're still not as talented as Oklahoma. So as long as the Sooners take care of business, this should be a win. Does definitely leave you a little bit apprehensive, though, because if there's a trap game on this schedule, or if there is an opportunity for you to trip up, I feel like this is the most obvious candidate.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm been high on Kansas since the end of last season, and for everything you just said, I don't think this is going to be an easy game for. Remember, hey, do you remember 2 years ago in Lawrence when they were up at halftime, so they started letting fans in for free?
Yes.
And all of a sudden, that place actually kind of got loud and turned into a real environment.
Oh man, that 2021 Kansas game. We just need a 30 for 30 about the whole 2021 season of Oklahoma football, for being honest. But yes, that was a bizarre chapter in what was a bizarre year of Sooner football. But as the Sooners prepare for battle with the Jayhawks, that game is set to take place on October 28th at Booth Memorial Stadium. So it'll be, gosh, that'll be the Sooners' first road trip in over a month. They go to Cincinnati on September 23rd. Then they're at home against Iowa State on September 30th. The following week is that neutral site date against Texas, followed by the bye, and they're at home against UCF on October 21st. So I think that's something you pay attention to as well. The Sooners will not have played on the road in 5 weeks at that point. So The opportunity is there. The window is there, I think, for Lance Leipold and the Jayhawks to pull off a start. They haven't really had a signature win yet, in my mind. I mean, yeah, they beat Texas in 2021, but even at the time, that was far more of an upset than, really a confirmation that that program had reascended to the level that they were playing at in the mid to late 2000s. So this may be the signature win opportunity for Kansas in 2023, and no doubt they'll be eager to snag it. The next game on the preview series is what, Jesse? What is Oklahoma's first game of November? I can't even remember offhand.
Oh shoot. Is it BYU?
It's not BYU. BYU is the 17th. I'm doing
Okay.
quick
That's
Google
right.
research here because
I should already know that, and I'm embarrassed I don't.
okay, there you go. It's Bedlam. It's Bedlam. There you
Oh,
go.
it's Bedlam.
Bedlam.
It's
November 4th. So that'll be fun. We'll get to preview Bedlam next time around on this series. But until then, for Jesse Crittenden, I am Parker Thune. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already subscribed to the OU Insider YouTube channel. And we will see you next time on the Quick Slants 2023 preview series to talk Oklahoma State, the final iteration of this matchup between the two programs as Big 12 opponents. We'll see you then.